Hello everyone, today we're going to have a look at zoos and seed banks. In particular, we want to be able to describe the role of zoos and seed banks in conservation, and we also want to be able to evaluate the use of zoos and seed banks in order to preserve endangered species. So biodiversity is one of our main focuses in this lesson. And what I'd like you to do to begin with is think about what things humans can do to affect either how much habitat is available or what sort of species are present in an area. Pause the video and see if you can come up with 3 different points. Okay, let's have a look through. So, habitat destruction, degradation, and fragmentation are 3 things that are going to affect the habitat directly. It could break up one stretch, or let's say we've got a forest and you have industrial activity or agricultural activity turning into little pockets of forest among farmland or managed land. This is going to fragment the area that you've got. If you're eating away at the edges of the forest all the way through to the centre, you're degrading it. And if you are burning it, or if you are physically removing the, let's say, trees as shelter in a forest, and then you are actively destroying all the plants that would have been there, really reducing the amount of species that that land can support. So those are the ways that you can affect the habitat. Looking just at species now, the actual animals or plants that would be present there, hunting and introducing alien species or foreign species or invasive species, you might have heard it as, are all going to affect the abundance of particular animals and plants and life that lives in that area. So, let's look at genetic diversity next, because if we're affecting the big organisms there, genetic diversity is going to be following for generations. So here you have a graph and you can see the article that it's credited from, and it represents the amount of diversity that is seen across different sorts of mammals. And we notice that in small populations, whether they're in the wild or kept in captivity, like zoos or managed habitats, they're going to lose their genetic diversity over time, unless managed very carefully. So looking at the little cheetahs on the end there, they have a very, very low amount of genetic diversity due to a few problems that have affected them. So we're going to pause for a moment and have a think about different things that we've learnt about in A-level biology that can affect the genetic diversity of an area. So have a look at this picture. On top you have the original population, and you have lots and lots of different traits there. So you've got red and blue, and then you have different dots representing different physical characteristics, and it changes over time. What's happening? You can see another example underneath where you've got this represented in a more real world way, where we've got different fox colours, coats, and you imagine that population progressing over time to look like this picture on the right here. So what process could be going on? So, I should have come up with genetic drift, and this is showing the change in allele frequencies, or how prevalent an allele is in a population, whether it's expressed or not, between generations due to chance events. Genetic drift is a random force working without selective pressures, meaning you have a random shift of alleles either up or down or back again, ultimately leading to the loss of different alleles. Another one that we can look at is this picture over here showing a few different white tigers. So if you know anything about the backstory of white tigers and what can happen to them, have a think about what you'd write down. Okay, so we should have thought about inbreeding depression here, where the closely related individuals are bred and therefore they are going to accumulate homozygous recessive genotypes, or in other words, homozygous recessive alleles are going to become more common in the offspring, which is particularly troublesome because it means that diseases caused by recessive alleles are more likely to be expressed. So weighing all of this together for zoos, I want you to think about your own personal opinion and then try to consider it from the other side, why you think zoos are a good thing and they're beneficial and we should have them, and a few arguments against zoos about why they might be damaging or harmful in some ways or unreliable. So see if you can put at least 2 points on each side out of a total of 4. Okay, let's start with the foresight. So, zoos are really important in scientific research. They're often linked to different universities and different conservation programs, either nationally or internationally. So, they're very important centres for scientific research in zoology. They're also very useful in order to try and maintain genetic diversity, because animals that are captured can be used in breeding programs and use things called stud books that we'll look at later in order to try and maintain a healthy population of animals, whether they are captive or not. They also link back into nature and try and reintroduce the animals back into their natural habitat, to build up their population numbers again, so it's very, very useful. And it's also great for education across a range of levels, whether you're public facing or if you are scientists using zoos as a facility to study exotic animals without all the travel. Against zoos, though, there are some very compelling arguments too. So we want to make sure that animals are not exhibited based on their crowd pulling power rather than their endangerment status. But unfortunately, this isn't manageable all the time because zoos need money from the public via entry tickets and things for sale and sponsorships and donations and other events in order to remain funded and be able to look after their animals. So they are very unlikely to choose a type of shrimp species that's found in the Arctic that might be more worthy of study and displaying. However, tigers and pandas and cute things are going to pull more people through their doors. And also in some zoos, animals are kept in inappropriate conditions. So they might be neglected, they might not have the right food, the right temperature, the right sort of enrichment that they need in order to live happily in captivity. So this is a very strong argument against zoos. Also, if you capture too many animals from the natural population and then display them in captivity, you might deplete the populations you're taking them from, which is against the goal of what we want to achieve here. And when you are reintroducing animals into the wild, there is a bit of risk involved. You cannot guarantee that it will be successful, or you cannot guarantee that they'll be able to achieve the funding to go the full way. So there are very strong arguments for both sides there that we need to be mindful of. So let's start thinking about those stud books that we mentioned before and about how zoos can make efforts to maintain genetic diversity. So we're using a resource here from Salters-Nuffield A-Level Biology, and this is about a lemur dating agency. And we're going to look at how they interpret this big old table in order to match up animals that are unrelated and will be able to hopefully have lots of healthy offspring. So let's look at the main bits that we've been given in this resource. So we have a few things that are the most important we'll be spending more of our time looking at in this example. We have the stud number, we have the sex of the animal, either female or male, you have the sire and the dam. So if we think of stud number as the animal's name, just there to represent what that animal is in a more simple way, sex is obvious, but sire and dam you might not have heard of before. The sire would be the male animal and the dam would be the female animal in this instance. So in other words, it tells you the parents or the mum and dad of that animal that has been bred. So going back to the points that we've mentioned before, let's have a quick recap. I want you to write down why stud books are needed if you are breeding animals in captivity. Pause the video and give it a go. Okay, so the main points that we need to have mentioned is that we have stud books to prevent inbreeding depression where closely related animals are mated or bred, and that this might cause the accumulation of deleterious or disease-causing recessive alleles. Another point that you could mention is that stud books can help increase genetic diversity in a captive population by selecting unrelated sires or dams. So, back to the lemurs. Now we know what these columns and rows mean, we need to be able to work out who is related to who. So it might help you to imagine a family tree if we're looking at things here. So in the stud number, we have two different lemurs. We have lemur 24 and lemur 25. Both are boys, and they're both raised by the same parents, L11 as the sire or the dad, and L15 for the mum. So we can imagine our family tree where we have our two parents here. We have lemurs 11 and lemur 15. And underneath we have the two offspring that are listed first. We have the male lemur L24 and we have another male lemur L25. So when you're looking through this, you want to really be paying attention to which ones are related, which ones share a sire or a dam, or which one is the child of a brother or sister lemur. So let's put this into practice. Let's have a look around. You have the full resource if you're in my class in your booklet, and there are these questions attached. Which female lemur in Zoo A has the most offspring? We have L21 needs a new mate. Which males must she not be paired with and why? Then we have wild-caught animals are genetically important. Why do you think this is the case? And the next part is which lemurs in the stud book extract are the most important to breed from? Which are the priority? And finally we round it off with question 4, give reasons for the use of stud books in captive breeding programs. So pause the video and give it a go yourself, and then we'll look through our answers together. Okay, so let's have a look at this question first. We want to work out of all the lemurs in the zoo, which one has the most offspring. And what we need to do is count up in either the dam column for the females, which one appears the most often. And you should see lemur 8 there 14 times in the dam section, so she takes that first prize. Next up, we're looking at lemur 21 in particular, and lemur 21 needs a new mate. We need to work out which males she must not be paired up with and why. So think, will we be worried about the unrelated or the related lemurs? And our answer is the related ones. We want to rule out anyone that is vaguely related to this animal. So that would include lemurs that could be the father listed in the sire, so that's L5. We're looking for any brothers which are going to either appear, firstly as male, we want to filter out all the female lemurs, let's not ignore those. And we're looking to eliminate any lemur with the sire listed as L5 or the dam listed as L8. So that gets rid of the brothers. And next we want to be careful for nephews or the male offspring from her sisters. So you need to look for two things through that list. Is the sex male and do they have a dam that is one of her sisters? So you would use all of these things to filter through your data and pick out the ones that are related. So pause here if you need a bit of a hand with it. You're going to look for the father, the brothers and the nephews and write those down. So the lemur list that we should have is 5 for the father, 13, 16, 26, 27, 47, 48, 51, 60 and 75 for a big family of brothers, and then L24 and 25 as the offspring of her sister. Next up we have a couple of questions. Wild-caught animals are genetically important. Why do you think this is the case? So we know that having genetic diversity is a good thing, so we just need to be able to express that properly. Wild-caught animals are genetically important because they bring new genes or unrelated genes into the captive group. This assumes they are not already related to those being held in captivity. So think fresh blood, new alleles, new genes, lovely. Next up, which lemurs in the stud book extract are the most important to breed from? So we are looking at our wild ones. We're looking at 4, 30 and 41 in particular because they haven't bred yet, they've not had offspring, and we assume that they are unrelated to every other lemur there. So they're nice fresh new faces. Next we need to give reasons for the use of stud books in captive breeding programs. And this is all about genetic stability and maintaining genetic diversity. So we're ensuring that genetic diversity within the captive population is maintained. We're going to describe this and say what that means. What does it mean to maintain genetic diversity? It means to avoid closely related individuals mating and therefore prevent inbreeding depression, which results from the accumulation of harmful recessive alleles. This will also help to avoid loss of genetic variation by genetic drift. So even though this might feel like a fun topic in talking about zoos and cute animals, we need to mention our genetic things key. So if we look through that, we've got genetic diversity, we have inbreeding depression as a keyword popping up, we've got harmful recessive alleles, and we've got genetic variation by genetic drift. So just keep an eye out for those keywords in these application style questions. Which leads us to a great opportunity to try and remember this and put it in your own words in a different context. And here we have another cute one. We have a black-footed ferret, shown in the photo below, is one of North America's most endangered species. In 1986, only 18 of them were living in the wild, less animals than people in our class. These were used to start a captive breeding program. There are now 6 zoos involved in this program. So having a look through, there should already be a few things that flag up in your head about what could be a bit of a problem here. So you need to suggest how this captive breeding program in the 6 zoos ensures that genetic diversity is maintained. So if we break this down for all of our 5 marks, the 5 different points we need to make are from a range of different concepts. We are making a suggestion, we are saying how something should be done. But we're also applying our biological knowledge to this because we need to describe genetic diversity and how it's maintained and why it's maintained. So pause the video and see if you can write 5 different points down that could be linked to how the breeding program should be carried out, and also how you can make sure you maintain genetic diversity. Alrighty, so here we have our big old mark scheme. Let's look through and see if you managed to pick up on any of the points they mentioned. So starting it off, we know that 18 individuals is a very small population or a very small gene pool. You could say it has low genetic diversity, or that some of them might have been related. So we need to express the original idea that we're not working with a lot here. We've got 18 in the population and it's very small. Next, we need to mention the fact that captive breeding is going to have the effect of increasing the population. Makes sense. And we need to do that suggestion of how we're doing this. So we should know by now that we're using a stud book or a record kept of what animals have bred with what others. You need to mention that perhaps zoos will select mates. You need to make sure that we are intervening and that there's human choice involved in selections and not just the animals going about choosing their own. You could mention that different zoos are going to exchange animals for breeding. You could also mention that this is because we need to prevent inbreeding. And we have to be careful with language here. So if you look at that additional comment, we are not going to accept interbreeding in the place of inbreeding. Remember, inbreeding is all within that small group, and interbreeding would be talking about exchanging between 2 or more separate groups. So they do not mean the same thing. Instead, you could say the opposite of encouraging outbreeding. For another point, you could say that you're trying to avoid genetic drift. You could mention the use of IVF or artificial insemination or surrogates as part of that breeding concept, and you can have another mark there at the end for measuring the genetic diversity by a particular method that you've learnt before. So DNA profiling, heterozygosity indexes, all sorts of other things. Score yourself out of 5, please, and add in any corrections or keywords you think you might need to remember for next time. And we're going to look at that last little chunk now. We're moved on from animals to lovely plants. So here's a good time for you to stop watching me and go and watch another lovely video. This is a seed bank facility centre. You can follow that link and it will take you on a wonderful tour of what it's like inside. And it's a very interesting change of pace. Once you've done that, if you're in my class, there is a section in your booklet for you to make a little summary of the main points of what it's like in there and why it's there for. And we want to fill in this mind map. Why would you store seeds instead of plants? Pause and give it a go. Okay, so let's look at the advantages. Seeds tend to be quite small, so it's easy to store lots of them. And if we can store lots of them, then there's going to be greater genetic diversity. We might be representing way more alleles with this larger population of seeds we've got. And we can store seeds for a very long time because seeds can last in a dormant state where they're not metabolically active, and this is a great thing for us keeping them for ages. This means that we don't have to maintain it much. If you imagine having a greenhouse full of 1,000 plants and having a bag with 1,000 seeds in, it's going to be much easier to look after one than the other. And we can also keep everything in similar conditions. We don't have to have a bit of Kew Gardens going on in order to make our different seeds happy. And it is going to be cheaper overall. So it is a huge benefit to have a stock of all the different seeds that you might need in agriculture, or to keep and maintain and replenish a particular habitat, or protect a very rare species of flower, or different plants. So very, very useful things to have. So we'll round it up with a few quick questions. First off, you need to describe the conditions used for the storage of seeds in seed banks. Let's think about 1 mark for this one. And we need to explain why seeds are stored in those conditions that you mentioned before. Let's see if you can push 3 marks through. Pause the video and give it a go. Alrighty, so from that video, very dry and cold conditions indoors to keep them happy. And they are stored there for 3 reasons I hope you've got. Firstly, to prevent or reduce enzyme activity. This is going to prevent the germination of seeds. And lastly, it's going to prevent the microbial growth or decay of seeds. So we're going to call it there for the lesson. Score yourself out of 4 for these. Again, if you're in my class, there is one more activity that I'd like you to do. That is on the Moodle page on Padlet. But everyone else, have a lovely day. See you later.